Tori, you don't have to do this.
It's too late. This ends tonight. No mercy!
We are talking Cobra Kai Season 3, and this is the first Netflix series. Of course, the first two seasons were made for YouTube originals. That's kind of gone the way of the dinosaur, but Netflix has bought this kind of popular series to have on their system. And this picks up, this is going to be a spoiler review. This picks up after Season 2, where Miguel, who is kind of our POV character for the kind of the younger generation here, is in hospital, obviously having had serious injury from the last season. I'm not going to go through the kind of the plot. Ultimately, it continues the rivalry between Miyagi-Do and Cobra Kai, but this time it's John Kreese really at the kind of the helm of Cobra Kai, and Daniel's son trying to reconnect with his connection to Miyagi-Do karate and things like this. Let's talk about, first of all, what works in this kind of this series. I think that this series works best when we follow Johnny, who, of course, was really our central character in the first two seasons. This is why it was called Cobra Kai. I actually think he flips more into the supporting role here, and this season is more of a direct sequel to the Karate Kid, because this season is less Cobra Kai and more about Daniel LaRousso and his kind of like finding his roots with the Miyagi style karate again. And the Cobra Kai in this season are pure antagonists, whilst the first two seasons you actually followed them from their point of view, but this switches. But whenever we do see Johnny on screen, who, to be honest with you, in my opinion now, is now a supporting character, in actual fact, I think Ralph Macchio was top billing, whilst he wasn't in the other series. But nonetheless, his kind of comedy quips about not understanding things and being out of touch is still funny. He still has the best lines, and I think this series benefits most when he's on screen. Although I will say some of his kind of like antics were a little bit head scratching. It's like he doesn't realise he has to plug a laptop in. I'm thinking they had plugs in the 80s. This isn't a new thing. You had to put things in the mains in the 80s. So some of the writing here isn't as strong, to be honest with you. The series is strongest where I feel it kind of focuses on the relationship between the three senseis, I would say. In particular, Daniel and Johnny, because their kind of like love-hate relationship, I think, is what this series really kind of it has its best scenes on. And I have to say, I really enjoyed the kind of the tribute to Pat Morita in the scenes where Daniel goes to Japan. And I gotta say, there's a scene here where he's kind of reading this kind of letter, and honestly, I got the total feels. And this is the first time this series has done that, so this has certainly had the biggest emotional connection for me in those episodes. And I think having lots of kind of cameos from, for example, characters from Karate Kid Part 2, his love interest, Chosen, who was kind of the bad guy in that one, do make some good distractions from kind of the main kind of plot here. I also really enjoyed the flashbacks with John Kreese in Vietnam. I actually thought they were quite well done. I didn't really think it kind of gave you his motivation today, but I guess it kind of shows you how he became so aggressive to a certain degree, but it doesn't really tell you why he's doing what he's doing. So I enjoyed the flashbacks on their own, but I don't know if it really had the intended result, if that makes sense. But I've got to be honest with you, I think this is the least out of the three seasons so far. As I've said, I think that the difference with this season compared to the other two is the focus is shifting away from Johnny, who was our main character in the first two seasons, to Daniel. And it really feels like more of a Karate Kid sequel rather than a series about Cobra Kai in this one. John Kreese is a little bit of a cartoony villain, as I've said. It doesn't help his motivations are so seem so ridiculous. I mean, what is he almost like he wants to take over the kind of the valley is what it almost seems like that. And like I said, that I just like some of the jokes I've said don't seem quite as clever. I think that the series really feels the fact that Miguel is ultimately nerfed for most of this season, because he was our point of view character. I know he's in the whole season, but obviously he's in rehab for a lot of the time. And I think the series really does, feel his kind of loss of him, basically, in the kind of the central kind of storylines of the of kind of the main characters. I think Tori is one of the best characters in this, and again they try and flesh out her kind of backstory to try and make her seem a little bit more relatable. But I actually think sometimes it's better just to have a bad guy is a bad guy, and then there's always a temptation, I think, with female bad guys to try and kind of soften them and make them a bit more relatable. And they try and do it, although I don't think they're particularly successful, but I think that actually worked in Tori's favour, to be honest with you. This series kind of reminded me of the WWF, because if you're familiar with the WWF, they have all like, oh, he's turning babyface, he has a heel turn, which basically means people decide they're going to be good or going to be bad from what they were before, and they're ultimately changing allegiances. And this kind of series is really has a lot of that, maybe a little bit kind of too much. The movie, the series as well, keeps doing this very annoying trope where when someone's kind of getting beaten down, they'll remember this kind of like, uplifting kind of bit of advice that was told to them either earlier in the episode or earlier in the season, and then they'll kind of fight back, and it's like this generic piece of advice. And in the finale, it happens 3 times with 3 separate characters. I think you can get away with it once, but 3 times is taking the piss. The series is still fun. I feel it's lost a little bit of its footing. I did like, there are some aspects I think that were clever. The fact, for example, that it's a little self-aware. There's a scene, for example, they have like a parents meeting in the first episode, sort of about the kind of all the kind of the violence that kind of kids had in the previous season, and someone shouts out, LaRousso, I heard you were the real bully, which is kind of like this internet theory that Daniel LaRousso was actually the kind of the bully in the original Karate Kid, and it wasn't Johnny at all. And that's obviously a reference to that, which I thought was quite clever. There are a couple of clever moments here, but I think the storylines involving the kids are weaker because you kind of feel like they're just going through the kind of the motions. They seem to be just constantly having fights, changing allegiances. Miguel is not there for the majority of the time, and I think his presence is really missing, and it's really felt. And it's just kind of like how this series ends, this season ends. This should be, we've had assault, we've had breaking and entering, burglary, all sorts of stuff. People should be in prison by the end of this kind of this season. It's obviously not a realistic TV show or streaming show, and it's still fun, but I hope the quality of the writing improves, because that to me was its biggest letdown. I think the writing in this season has dropped significantly, and I think it needs to go back to what worked. Certainly, I think the first season is the strongest, but it's progressively getting slowly. It's a slow decline. It's not dropped off a cliff, but it is a slow decline so far, and there's still time to pull it back. This series hasn't kind of like jumped the shark, so to speak, but it's heading in that direction. So to me, this is still a fun series. It's still an above average series, but it's getting weaker. It's not as strong. There's not the standout moments. I mean, the finale, as silly as it was in season 2, was a great finale. But it doesn't have anything as fun as that, and it also doesn't quite have the heart that was in season 1. So it's really just lacking on kind of both fronts this season. I also got to say, I think the introduction of some ex-love interests seemed a bit shooed in, and that's a kind of pun intended, if you get what I'm saying on that one. But we actually have 2 of them. It didn't feel necessary. It just felt like, oh, we've got this person who was in the original films. Let's get him in. And then they've done that about 5 times in this series. I don't know. It's buckling a little bit. Have you seen it? I want to give this one a 6. What did you think of this season compared to the previous 2 seasons? I'm hopeful that it'll kind of pull out, but I'm feeling it's buckling a little bit under its kind of like its own weight here. What did you think? Leave me a comment and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.